the microhistory of Ewing Gibson, the sun at the center of the constellation. Ewing Gibson was born in 1847 in the soft, folded hills of East Tennessee, at the far edge of what the wider world considered civilization. His childhood unfolded in the region your people long inhabited, a place you call the Outer Rim. It was not a fixed location on any map, but a shifting frontier where the reach of law, authority, and rigid social categories thinned. Families like his lived just far enough beyond the grasp of the Tidewater's rules and the Piedmont's expectations that they could breathe, survive, and define themselves on their own terms. He was the son of Charles Gibson Jr. and Oni/Asa Collins, two names shaped by generations of movement and pressure stretching back to Virginia. The laws written in the Tidewater, sharpened in the Piedmont, and carried westward had long tried to sort families like theirs into boxes that never fit. By the time Ewing was born, those forces had already pushed his people into the Outer Rim, a place where the land was hard, the kin networks were strong, and the world beyond the ridges rarely understood the lives lived there. As a boy, Ewing grew up in the rhythms of that world. The seasons, the work, the gatherings, the kin who lived just over the next ridge. The Gibson and Collins families were part of a larger constellation of people who had moved together for generations, following familiar faces and familiar faiths. They were not isolated, but they lived in a world that outsiders rarely saw clearly, a world shaped by necessity, community, and the quiet autonomy that came from living just beyond the reach of constant oversight. When the Civil War began in 1861, Ewing was a teenager, old enough to understand fear, old enough to feel the uncertainty in the air, but still young enough to be shaped by it rather than to shape it. The war did not bring great battles to the Outer Rim, but it unsettled everything. Loyalties were divided. Armies passed through. Food grew scarce. The familiar world of his childhood shifted under his feet. By the time the war ended, Ewing was living in Jonesville, Virginia, a small place at the crossroads of families and histories that had been intertwined for generations. In the years after the war, Ewing began to build a life of his own. He married Elizabeth Collins, a woman whose family had long been part of the same Outer Rim constellation. Their first child was born in Virginia, but soon after, Ewing and Elizabeth made a choice that countless families before them had made. They passed through the Cumberland Gap, following the old road into Kentucky. The gap was more than a passageway. It was the doorway into a new Outer Rim, a place where they hoped the land might be kinder, the opportunities broader, and the future a little more open than the one they had known in Tennessee and Virginia. In Kentucky, they built a household and welcomed more children into the world. But their time together was short. In 1878, after giving birth to their youngest son, Meredith, Elizabeth died, leaving Ewing a widower with several children and an infant who needed more care than a grieving father could manage alone. In the 1880 census, Ewing appears living with his older children, while baby Meredith is being raised by Ewing's parents, Charles and Ona, who had followed their son into Kentucky. It was a practical arrangement, the kind families in the Outer Rim had always made. The old helping the young helping the old, everyone doing what needed to be done to keep the family whole. In time, Ewing remarried. His second wife, Nancy Callahan, helped him rebuild a home after loss. Together they created a blended family, raising children in the same quiet, steady way that had sustained their people for generations. Their household was not grand, but it was stable. A place where children grew, where work was shared, where life continued. In the Outer Rim, survival itself was a kind of success, and Ewing and Nancy managed more than that. They built a life. Over the generations, Ewing's children and grandchildren would move far beyond the ridges and hollers of East Tennessee and Kentucky. Some went north into Indiana. Others scattered across the Midwest. The old labels faded. The old pressures loosened. The world opened. And yet, when you trace the lines backward, through the migrations, the marriages, the county lines, the church records, the census pages, they all converge on him. Ewing is the hinge between two eras, the last generation shaped entirely by the old Outer Rim world, and the first generation whose descendants would step fully into the broader American story. He is not a symbol. He is not a myth. He is not a heroic figure meant to carry the weight of a people. He is simply a man who lived at the turning point of a long, complicated history, a man whose life sits at the center of a constellation that stretches back to the tidewater and forward to the present. This is where the story begins. Not with a legend, not with a mystery, not with a label, but with a human being.